Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 2018 Sprott Natural Resource Symposium. We're here with Darren Klink from Bluestone Resources. This is a company I've written about in the past, but it is not a stock I own today. Of course, it's Darren's job to try to convince me to change that, and maybe you too. But let's go ahead and talk about Bluestone. Tell us the basics of the story, and then we'll get into some questions.
Thanks, Louis. Yeah, great to be here. Well, Bluestone's a relatively new company. In fact, it's just over 12 months ago that really the formation of Bluestone came together with the acquisition of the Cerro Blanco project in the southeastern part of Guatemala. In fact, Louis's been there to visit. And that was an asset that had been held by Goldcorp, and previous to that Glamis, for many years, an advanced asset, high-grade, low-sulfidation epithermal project that in fact has had more than $200 million invested in it, both into the gold project and also a very interesting geothermal asset that is right adjacent to the project. So Bluestone effectively was successful in raising $80 million Canadian last year. That fund really went to acquire the asset from Goldcorp for $18 million US. And then subsequently, we've been embarking really on a feasibility study, which is on track to be completed by the end of this year on that gold asset, the Cerro Blanco Gold Project. And all things being equal, as we move forward with that, we'll look to finance the project next year.
Okay, so it's a known gold discovery. It's been around for a while. Actually, this project was one that the sort of legendary Explorers League honoree from Casey days, Simon Ridgway, worked on. So when I heard about this story, it's the first thing I did. I picked up the phone, talked to Simon, and said, you know, tell me the dirt. Is this a real deal? Did these guys buy really a pig in a poke, right? No, and Simon, who has no interest in it now, he was very, he loved the asset. The question, of course, is Guatemala. It's been in the news lately. Your neighbors have a brilliant super high grade silver project there, but it's been shut down. It's in the courts, and that makes investors nervous. Can you talk about the political environment in Guatemala for us, please?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, there's definitely been a setback here in recent times, particularly with the Tahoe Escobal project, and that's working its way through the legal system right now. And in fact, I think everyone's quite cautiously optimistic there'll be a positive outcome to that with the Constitutional Court. I think when you look at Guatemala and having had experience in my career in a number of other developing countries, you get ebbs and flows. You get, the tide comes in, the tide goes out. And in the case of Guatemala, traditionally it's been very much a pro-business, right-of-center government. In fact, over the last decade, it's had one of the most stable currencies in Latin America, which really is a testament, I think, in terms of the strength of the economy. Strong influence from the United States as well. In fact, about 40% of the exports that leave Guatemala end up in the U.S. And so from a geopolitical perspective, definitely from my perspective, having visited and worked in a number of different jurisdictions around the world, first day on the job, I met with the mining minister in Guatemala City. Very clear message from him, along with, as he said, really the entire cabinet, very much a pro-business government. Their job was to seek out investment. And I think, from some perspective, I mean, it demonstrates that there is a judicial system, it is independent. There is precedent here over the last 18 months with regards to a similar situation that went through to the Constitutional Court that actually ended up with a ruling on a hydro project that was in favor of the project and the company to allow them to move forward, and the system's working through the system that they have there. So I think that's a positive thing. I don't lose a lot of sleep at night around quote unquote geopolitical risk here in Guatemala. We're very focused, of course, on the project, our local communities, our local stakeholders, and of course our government partners as well.
Is there any kind of set in law time limit? Like, is there, they have to review cases by a certain period? Or is there any limit to how long this could take? Because I mean, no question about the asset. Everybody's going to have this question. It'd be reassuring to know if there's some point at which, there's got to be some answer one way or the other.
Sure. I think it's always, it's always dangerous, of course, to throw a blanket over an entire country. I know we're not trying to do that as well. And there, each situation, each project, each situation is a little bit different. No doubt, I mean, precedent would demonstrate that, in fact, there should be an outcome from the Constitutional Court already. And so it could be very soon, but I can't say specifically. At the end of the day, it sits within the justices, and that's the whole point of having a fair and very transparent and independent judicial system as well. So I think all parties are hopeful across the board that there'll be an outcome soon. As I said, the precedent with the hydro project in the northeastern part of the country was was positive from the perspective that they worked through it, and then ultimately came out with a ruling. And no doubt, I think investors are eagerly watching for that as well. But from our perspective at Cerro Blanco down in the southeastern part of the country, we're very focused on the project. We've really been fortunate to have quite a good head start, not only from an investment perspective, but I think also more importantly in today's day and age, is from a social perspective. This project is one that's been socialized for well over a decade. You talked about Simon Ridgway going there probably close to 2 decades ago, in fact. And this is largely an agricultural area that the folks there refer to this as our project, and so we've really been fortunate from that perspective. You saw it yourself, Louis, when you and I were there walking around the central square, and and for me, that's a key focus for this company as we move forward is obviously our relationship with all of our stakeholders.
That's an interesting point. We walked around the town square of the village nearby, and everybody knew the mining guys, waved to them, greeted them. It was actually one of the more positive, I would say, local settings that I've seen. On the other hand, it is impressive. You stand on the hill that has the gold in it, and you look out in the valley, and you see rows on rows of watermelon plants and so on. And those guys aren't worried about you poisoning the water and all that stuff.
Well, I mean, coming as a farmer myself from Alberta, I think you're always worried about the land. And in fact, as mining companies, as resource developers, we should encourage that. There's no reason at all. From that perspective, the fact is that we are a guest there, full stop. And I've made that very clear, not only to the mining minister, but the team on the ground. And as I said, we're very fortunate that we've acquired a team that has been there for some time and has really been able to build and culture those relationships. In this day and age, there's no reason why you can't manage your environmental footprint at a very high level. The advantage we've got going here is this is a relatively small mine, underground, small footprint.
Yeah, not a giant, huge open pit.
Look, the footprint on this, I think if you looked at the process plant, you would fit into a department store sort of parking lot. And not typically what you see in many cases in modern mines today, where they tend to go bigger because, of course, the grades are lower. You need to move more rock. You've got a bigger footprint. So, no, it's definitely something from an environmental management perspective we need to continue to focus on. It's again, going back to Goldcorp and Glamis days, there's between 10 and 15 years of environmental data that's been kept all the way through. That engagement with your local stakeholders to make sure you've got those transparent discussions and dialogue are absolutely key. But as I said, we're fortunate this is a small footprint, small tonnage, high grade, and it's had the head start as well, where, as I said, a lot of that sort of foundational work has already been completed and is continuing to be ongoing.
Okay. Well, another thing I noticed standing on the rocks looking at the project, of course, you can't, I noticed, it's part of the story, is what you call interesting geothermal optionality. Tell us a little bit about that. What's the potential? And as an investor who's focused on the gold and the minerals in the ground, I also wonder, isn't that dangerous if the rocks are hot? I've been to places where it was an extra expense, and it was kind of a hazard for the miners to work in these hot environments. How do you manage that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. It's quite unique to have the potential to generate your own power at a mine site today, and so obviously that was something that was quite interesting to me, not coming from a geothermal background. And in fact, when the transaction was first completed, the phone started ringing. It was actually about the geothermal project. There was a number of both Latin American and North American groups that were inquiring, because of the $230 million that's already been invested in the overall project, about 60 million of that, in fact, was into the geothermal. So there's been a lot of drilling, a lot of exploration work, studies that have been done, and in fact, we approved and kicked off a flow test program where we actually were flow testing some of the wells to get a better sense from a technical perspective in terms of what really existed there. We're right now just working through that data, and so we'll see. I think one of the options here is to potentially produce some or all of the power that the mine needs. Again, not a lot of power because it's a small footprint, but potentially an opportunity for us. As you point out, because of the geothermal project, which is east of the mine, which means it comes from hot water. As you go deeper into the Earth's crust, of course, the water gets hotter. In the mine itself, right now, because as part of the acquisition, we picked up quite a bit of that development work that had already been completed by Goldcorp. So about a third of the deposit has already been tunneled to. Effectively, we've got a decline into, and it's been dewatered. As you get down to the bottom part of where that is, the ambient temperature picks up. It's in the mid 30 degrees. So no doubt warm. Not unusual from the perspective that you'd have hot working conditions in underground mines, and I'm sure you've been in others before. But no doubt you need to take special precautions with regards to the water.
Yeah, 30 degrees is a lot cooler than the water.
That's right.
The water coming to surface is...
Yeah, well, the water that actually goes into the sump when you pick it up at the bottom of the mine is about 60 degrees C. And in fact, there's a mine that's operating right now in Nicaragua that's been operating for a number of years. It's got that sort of temperature of water in it. But that really requires that you have proper processes to manage that. And so Goldcorp was successful in driving 3.5 kilometers of tunnels in those conditions before. They successfully were able to do that without any lost time injuries, but you have to have the proper processes in place from the health and safety perspective. And that goes without saying for any modern mine today. You need to have the proper processes in place. You need to plan appropriately. So the feasibility study is going to spell that out. It's going to spell out the details around the technical aspects in terms of how we'll manage that as we go forward. No doubt we've got some flexibility involved because there's a good portion of the ore body that is already developed to and is dewatered. And as you saw when you first walk into the underground mine, it feels really like any other underground mine.
Yeah.
As you go deeper, we would expect, of course, that you're going to have to continue to implement those processes to deal with it. So that'll be spelled out in the feasibility study. We're very confident about that. And that feasibility study is expected to be completed by the end of this year.
And so the work plan is feasibility study and then project finance and construction decision, or is there, okay, feasibility study, but we have these exploration targets.
Right.
We're gonna, what's the sort of...
No, good question. No, we're firmly focused on the feasibility study. We've completed about 11,000 meters of drilling here over the last couple of quarters, and that was really solely focused on infill drilling that was done for the feasibility study.
And sorry, pause on that note. I mean, I saw some of the really excellent numbers, and were they where you expected things to be? The models confirmed, or any changes, any surprises
Sure.
there?
No, it's been really helpful for us, I think, in terms of enhancing the continuity and really confirming the overall geologic interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
We did quite a bit of structural geology work late last year and early this year, and that drilling, both from underground and from surface, allowed us to really firm that up. So we'll be updating the resource here over the near term, and that's really part of what's, of course, feeding into the feasibility study as it goes to the mine planning team, etc. Things like geotech drilling, of course, has been ongoing. We're fortunate because, again, with that almost $200 million that went into the mine, about 170 into the mine and 60 million into the geothermal project historically, a lot of that study work and 120,000 meters of drilling, the underground decline, etc., has already been completed. So again, a bit of a head start. But no, we're very pleased with the way that the drilling has gone. It's definitely firmed up the geologic model. The resource geology team's working on that now. And then as we move forward here towards the end of the year, the other bits and pieces will feed into that. So that's a key milestone for us, is the end of the year with the feasibility study. I think there's very few projects out there today that are permitted and are really this close to potentially a construction decision where you raise the capital and you go and build it. And from the perspective as well, in terms of the high-grade nature of it, the strong support from the local communities, etc., I think we're well positioned, but no doubt still lots of work to do.
And so this is a pretty near time frames. We've got our resource coming soon and feasibility by the end of the year, and this is all paid for, right? You still have plenty of cash in the bank?
That's correct. Yeah, I know we're well financed. We're fortunate that with the capital raising that was done last year, so $80 million Canadian was raised. As I said, a portion of that went to buy the asset from Goldcorp, and then subsequently, really, we've been advancing the asset through the drilling, the technical studies, and doing the feasibility study. As part of that financing, we were also quite fortunate to bring on board a key group of shareholders, some of which are arguably some of the best investors in the space. So the Lundin family is our largest holder. They have a 36% interest. CD Capital out of London, a resource-focused private equity group, has 17% as well. And when you add in Goldcorp's position, which they maintain, which was 4.9% in management, about 65% of the stock actually sits between those four hands. So that's a great thing, I think, from an investor perspective as well. You've got a very tight shareholding structure. You've got some of the smartest minds in the industry that are obviously backing this. And when you look at it, I mean, from the perspective of having a 10-gram deposit, small footprint, lots of exploration potential, which we're really excited about and are just in the process now of kicking off a bit of a step-out program from an exploration perspective. This is a great place for a company like Bluestone to build from.
Is one of the options you're considering maybe monetizing the geothermal? Like, it's one thing to generate your own power, and that helps on the OpEx, but if the markets are crappy, selling that and minimizing the capital you need to raise could be a shortcut. Is that something you're considering?
I think the best way to describe it is there's plenty of optionality. There's no doubt that there'll be synergies, I think, between the geothermal project and the mining project. How we go about unlocking those synergies is still kind of up in the air. And as I said, I mean, we effectively acquired an asset with lots of data points and didn't really necessarily know how they all fit together. And so we've brought on some experts out of the United States to help us with that geothermal aspect. And really are kind of going through that now. And I think, as we get, into the back half of this year now, we'll start to be able to have a few more discussions with the board to figure out, what the best alchemy is. But no doubt there will be some synergies and there will be options, both when it comes to the geothermal project and how that actually works in with the precious metals project.
Okay, and sorry, one last point on the drilling. Are all the results out now? Is that done, or is there still more to come?
We've still got a handful of results on that.
Sorry, the resource drilling.
Yeah, sorry, on the resource drilling that'll come out. As you said, I mean, you can see there's some great results we've put out so far. We've definitely got some really good traction around that. So there's still a handful of that'll make its way out into the system here over the next few weeks. And then with the step-out program, where we're actually going beyond the 400 by 800 meter deposit, which we've just kicked off here recently, I'd expect we'd start to see results come through in assays probably in September. Somewhere.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Very good. Thanks very much, Louis. Appreciate having us on.